Okay, we're live.
Hello, everybody. My name is Diego Saez-Trumper. I'm a senior research scientist at the Wikimedia Foundation, and today I'm glad to introduce the June 2025 Research Showcase. Research showcases are all about recognizing and sharing recent research that are relevant to the Wikimedia projects. For those that are joining live, we welcome you to ask questions to the speakers in the YouTube chat. My colleague Claudia Lowe would be monitoring those questions. We kindly ask you, the attendees, follow the friendly space policy and universal code of conduct from the foundation. The topic for today is titled Ensuring Content Integrity on Wikipedia. And we have two great invited talks. The first one would be Manuel Horta Ribeiro from the Princeton University, and he's going to talk about the differential effects of page protection on Wikipedia article quality. And after Manuel's presentation, we'll have Yosha Askenazi from the University of Michigan that is going to present the work entitled Sing Like an AI, How LLMs Applied and Misapplied Wikipedia Neutrality Norms. So let me introduce more in detail our first speaker, Manuel Horta Rivero is an assistant professor of computer science at the Princeton University and faculty affiliate at the Center for Information Technology Policy. He earned his PhD from IPFL in Switzerland, working with also our fellow Bob West. And he also has his master and bachelor from the Universidade Federal de Minas Gerais in Brazil, in the beautiful Belo Horizonte. And his research explores the intersection of computational social science, AI, and social computing, focusing on real-world impact. His work has influenced public debate and platform policy and includes collaboration with companies like Meta, Reddit, and Microsoft. So with that, I uh, give you the mic, Manuel. You can start. You can share your screen, and thank you very much for coming. And I'm happy to have you here.
Thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about, wait, first, can, okay, can you see, can my screen, can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Great. So today, I'm gonna talk about page protection on Wikipedia, right? So this is work led by Torsten. I'm presenting. He's the first author. He did most of the work. And it's work with Robert West, who was my advisor at DPFL, and Dennis was Torsten advisors at in Austria, right? So basically, this paper is about page protections on Wikipedia. But let's start from the beginning. Uh, Basically, Wikipedia is open by design. Anyone can edit. That's one of the foundational principles of the Wikipedia. But at the same time, oftentimes there's vandalism. There are a lot of disruptive edits, and a solution that was created to respond to this challenge was the notion of page protections. So these are basically restrictions upon who can edit Wikipedia pages. So for example, this is an example of a page protection. There's all on the Thor Marvel Comics page. Um, there's all these reverts because someone is vandalizing the page, and then we're gonna get deeper into that later. But a user requests for indefinite page protection on that page at some point, and this is the a little screenshot of the request for protection. And after that, some Wikipedia admin approves this request, and the page becomes protected, right? So here, there's different kinds of protection. This is semi-protection, which restricts the kind of users that can edit this page or not. So this is how it typically goes, right? Um, so basically, admins enforce these editing restrictions. There's a bunch of different types of protections that basically limit the subset of users that can edit this page after the protection is enabled. But in all of them, right? Like basically there's this suspension of the Wikipedia principle that everyone can edit a page. And this is intended to really be a temporary and last resort measurement, right? So this is like to just like be very specific of how this goes. The way this happens is that most page protections, like page protections can be triggered by admins, but typically they're triggered by users. So there's a page where you can request for a page protection. Um, this request will be reviewed by an admin. Um, which will either accept or decline the page protection, right? And sometimes they'll issue another like maybe they won't give exactly the kind of page protection or exactly the kind of decision that you asked for, but they will view your case, right? And there's a bunch of as I said, there's a bunch of types of page protections. So here you can see like depending on the type of page protections, this means that, for instance, new users or auto confirmed users or extended confirmed users, which are different kind of like types of users that you progress as you contribute to Wikipedia. Like this will determine which kinds of users are able to edit the page, right? So the first thing is that page protections, they're really meant as this way of as this like last resort. But it turns out that they're quite consequential. So this is kind of like a jumping ahead. But before I even talk about the data, let me just give you some flavor of that. So for example, even though very few pages are protected at any given moment in time, so less than 1% of the Wikipedia pages, these pages attract disproportionate attention. So the page protected pages correspond in 2022 um, corresponds to 15% of all page views and 56% of the views to the top 1,000 daily articles, right? So basically, in this plot here, I'm showing the date on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis, I'm showing the number of page views. In blue, I'm showing all articles, and in black, I'm showing the top 100 articles. And the dotted lines correspond to the page protected the fraction of views that go to page protected pages. So you can see that even though they're not that they're very few, they're very influential, even among the top 100, 1,000 articles, right? So, okay, even though like page protection is inconsequential on the page level, it's actually very consequential in terms of like the page view level, right? And you can see that page protections come in all different flavors as well in terms of when like how long they last, right? So this is kind of the CDF, the CCDF function of page protections, meaning that like the percentage of page protections that last up to some amount of days, right? So most page protections last less than 2 weeks. They're quite short, right? But some can last, like up to 6 months, for example. And really here, I would like to stress that page protections are really this trade-off between openness and content integrity, which is one of the key trade-offs that Wikipedia has to navigate. On the one hand, right, it restricts editing to trusted users, which can help prevent damage, right, to high visibility and to controversial pages. But on the other hand, this definitely limits new contributor participation and may reduce diversity of the content that's added to Wikipedia. It can also be used for misuse, right? It can also be used specifically to suppress disagreement or to suppress opposing views to be incorporated into a page. So there's this question of like, given that there is this clear trade-off, how can we understand in which cases page protections make sense, right? And this is all what this paper is about. This paper is about trying to figure out where page protections make sense, right? Through a quantitative study. And to do that, we basically crawled all page protections from roughly a decade worth of page protections from 2012 to 2013. These page protections are associated with many requests for page protections, and but also you have page protections that exist in the like without these requests for page protections, right? Because an admin can trigger them, right? And here we're really focusing on the first protection spell per article because some articles get page protected all the time. And it's really confusing. Like if we want to do causal inference here, it's really confusing what was due to the first protection versus the latter protections. And just so you get a sense, this is the number of revisions before and after page protections are requested and are enacted. And you can see that like one thing that happens is that usually page protections they come right before this storm of edits, right? So there's actually like to add to the previous point, right? Page protections happen at a moment where there's a lot of editing activity in the page, good or bad, right? And here really the decision is, do we let chaos reign a bit and and like that the page will eventually settle down, or do we just say, okay, no, it's very important that this remains like high quality content throughout this edit war, if you will, and let's restrict it, right? Um, and but implicit to everything I'm saying here, there's this notion of quality, right? So basically, here I'm saying, oh, we want page protections when it makes sense. But what I'm really saying is that ultimately, what we want is that page protections help improve Wikipedia's quality. But that the quality is like a super hazy term and like ill-defined term. So in to make this concrete here, we're going to use ORIS as a measure of quality, right? So Wikipedia has a quality scale that correct categorizes articles among various like categories like stub, start, good article, featured article, and so on. And we use some sort of out of the box classifier that scores articles into these categories based on the structure of the article, right? So an important limitation of this work is that we don't actually look at the content of the article. We just look at something that seems to be very heavily correlated, which is the structure of the article. Always looks at things like article length, number of reference and links, section counts, the template, the citations. Like if things look, it's kind of like an aesthetic uh, classifier of quality, right? Like if it looks like a high quality article, it probably is a high quality article. And this is just a notion of like this is the some sort of assessment table from the English Wikipedia that was done by I think this is without ORIS. This is estimated without ORIS, as far as I understand. No, wait, no, this is with ORIS. Sorry, this is with ORIS. Um, And here when we're gonna talk about low versus high quality articles in the reminder of the presentation, we're really gonna talk about like we're gonna have a quartile based approach. So um, the article quality gives us some prediction, and we're just gonna use this number that's outputted by the article quality model to classify articles as being in the higher quartile or the lower quartile to decide whether they're high quality articles or low quality articles. And kind of like the whole idea of this study was to say, okay, what uh, we want to know what's the effect of protecting pages, right? And the way we go about this is that we do a matched study. This means that we're getting pages that were protected, where the admin took this decision, and we're comparing it to the closest possible types of pages. And in this case, we chose this control group to be the pages where there was something going on to the extent that someone asked for a protection and but the admins refused to give this page a page protection for whatever reason, right? So here we're really assuming that there's some variance in the way that the admins enact this decision, that this decision is not deterministic, right? That it, in a way, this is a bit of a coin flip, whether this page gets protected or doesn't get protected. But to make this more compelling, right? Because clearly these kinds of pages will be different. We do this matching step where essentially we get all sorts of relevant features around the page, such as editing activities, reverts, the article quality of the page, the article age and length. And we get those through time before the RFP was enacted. And we basically look at what happened. Like we basically try to find pairs of pages for which on the exact same date they both were like both of these pages requested RFPs, but one of these page was protected and the other one was not protected. And once we get that, like we get actually very good matches. We get pages that look a lot like each other in those moments in times. So for example, here it's the mean article quality for those pages before matching and after matching. And matching here really does this really kind of like make the two time series look very similar. So the pages that are in a treatment and control group, they really have the similar trajectories over these features. And in the appendix of this paper, we show a lot of like plots that try to convince you that okay, this is actually something fair to do. And what we do with that is that we use this difference in differences approach. So now that we have this two time series that we're arguing are comparable, we assume that in the absence of the intervention, they would evolve similarly, right? So what we assume here is that had the treated page, the page that received the request for protection, not being um, not being treated, had it also been declined, the two time series for these outcomes that we care about, especially for quality, would continue to be the same, right? So what we're saying here is that if we go back here, what we're saying here is that had this like these things would continue to be exactly the same. Uh, this time series would continue to be exactly aligned after time zero on the right hand side, right? So one way to look at this is basically you have these two lines in time, and you're basically saying that the difference in differences, and hence the name of the method, would remain constant here, right? And of course, matching help supports the hypothesis because we can argue that both types of pages are really comparable in the pre-intervention period. So with this, let me show you some results on what did we find, right? So here, this is like a big, complicated plot, but let me break it down a bit, right? So here on the x-axis, I'm showing the relative time, right? So the number of weeks from the time when the treated article was protected by an admin. And on the y-axis, I'm showing the quality score. Okay. And I'm separating this effect um, for pages that are protected for different time spans. When basically some pages are protected for 1 to 6 days, some pages are protected for seven, exactly a week, like actually a surprising amount, like that's the typical suspend period. And some pages are protected for more than that. And I'm just dividing into these three categories. And so if we look before time zero, what we're showing here, it's basically that the time series kind of makes sense, right? Like the difference before the intervention is actually not significant. But as we move alongside the x-axis, we show that increasingly there's this like kind of small effect, but it's really close to null, right? So there doesn't seem to be like in the end, like if you look at times equals 12, we find that there's a minor increase in quality for pages protected for 7 and longer periods of time. But what we found that's interesting is that if you break this down by type of page, you actually find very heterogeneous results. So these are the same plots reproduced for low quality articles and for high quality articles. And in this case, we kind of find the reverse results. So for low quality articles, we find that pages um, seem to suffer from page protections. So after page protection is enacted, there's actually a decrease in the quality of articles. However, for high quality articles, the effect is reversed and much stronger, actually. So for high quality articles, basically there's a significant increase in the quality of the pages that were protected. And to me, this makes perfect, I mean, in hindsight, right? Like everything is obvious once you know the answer, but this makes perfect sense in terms of what page protections do, right? Because they are doing this trade-off between blocking new contributions and preventing people from kind of like expressing interest and engaging with a page and vandalism, right? When you have something to vandalize, the prevailing force is that this is like page protections prevent the vandalism to happen and allow the page to continuously grow in a meaningful way and to improve its quality in a meaningful way. When you don't have anything to prevent, then the opposite is true. And actually, you might, like the vandalism is outweighed by the sheer capacity. Like there's interest in this topic, people are looking at it, and we're preventing them to collaborate. So it really seems to matter here. We also ran some subsequent analysis on pages of different topics, and we did find some differences, right? So, for example, STEAM related topics seem to be much like the effect seems to be much more minute for for page protections. And I wonder, like, I have a hypothesis here, which is not tested, of to which extent this is because these pages are often edited by special interest groups or people who are very committed, like it's not like you have general public interest in editing a lot of STEAM topics, but that a lot of the edits come from people that systematically edit there. So maybe that's why the page protections have a differential effect there. But in general, this seems to hold um, across, for instance, like if you look at geography or if you look at history and society, we do see the same effects here at week 12, 12 weeks after this thing happened. So I think I'm already like a minute over my time, but kind of like we find this differential effect around page protection, where if the pages are low quality, protection seems to be harmful, and if the page is high quality, protection seems to be helpful. And like like the mechanism that makes sense to me here is that protection halts vandalism but limits improvement. And in terms of like what should Wikipedia draw from this, right? Is that really I think that page protect like discussions around when to protect a page should be perhaps guided around how much there is to protect, right? Which I like if you look at page protections, it doesn't seem to be very clearly the criteria that it's being used, right? Um, Kind of like in terms of the limitations and future directions that I think this work brings. First, like we only did English Wikipedia, and I think it's Wikipedia, so um, there should be work that is done in multiple languages, and it's a shame that we didn't manage to do it. This was very like the matching process is very intensive here. But second, that one thing that would be very interesting is doing an extension of this work for for the editor level, right? So for basically for looking, if you look, because here we're looking at the trajectory of pages, but I really wonder what would happen if we looked at trajectory of editors. So this is it. This is amazing work led by Torsten. Like any mistakes in this presentation are probably my own, but I'll be very happy to take any questions and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Manuel. It was super interesting. I have a lot of questions, but I also know that we have some questions from the audience. So I would start with some questions from YouTube. Claudia, I understand that we have some question from YouTube.
Yep. So we have a question from Alex Stinson. Do you have any sense on how quality of narrative is being affected?
So quality of narrative. Yeah.
Yes.
So my sense, like, I mean, on from the data angle, no, right? My sense is basically that on Wikipedia, it's very hard to grow a page very long if you don't have quality of narrative. So the reason, like after, like if you look at the Oris correlates very well. Like if you forget Oris, page length correlates very well with page quality. And the reason why is that if you add a bunch of stuff that it's not well sourced, that it's like not written in a correct style, it'll be cut off, right? So like I find it very unlikely that these pages are becoming long and like becoming very poorly narrated or that like the prose is very off. Because what typically happens if you write prose that is very off is that like you have a lot of people that are just like mercilessly cut off all that prose. So it's more of a qualitative intuition rather than a data-driven one. But I get a sense that that's why article length is such a good predictor of page quality, because there are a lot of social processes in place in Wikipedia that penalize you heavily for adding content that doesn't abide by the rules, and like they're very efficient at doing that.
Thank you, Manuel. I know we have more questions from YouTube, but we also have a question here in the room. Pablo, if you want to ask your question.
Thanks, Diego. Thank you, Manuel, for sharing this work. It's very interesting, and you're very humble because you didn't mention that this paper is candidate for Press Paper Award in a conference next week. So it's great to have the spoiler this week for us and
Yeah,
for the
hopefully.
audience.
Let's see.
Yeah, well, you have two papers candidates, so you have high chances. So my question goes like, I wonder if you're considering the different kind of page protections that exist in Wikipedia. And I'm asking that because there are cases like pending changes that allow people to contribute to the article, but they restrict the visibility. So that resonates somehow with that balance of keeping the openness, but maintaining the content integrity of the knowledge that is visible to the general audience. So I'm wondering how you manage the different kinds of page protections.
So yeah, so here we really focused on so the page protections, even though there's a lot of them, like most of them are temporary edit, like they're very concentrated into um, temporary edits. They're very concentrated into kind of either semi or extended confirmed. So we ended up focusing on these two just because they were like by far, I think it's these two, semi-protected, extended, confirmed, which is basically whether you have to have an account or whether you have to have an account verified by email and have made like the same criteria that you need to create a new. I think extended confirm is like the same criteria you need to create a new article, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, so we focused on those two. Um, I wonder how prevalent pending changes are, but I think that could be a good compromise, right? Like on the flip side, right? Like I wonder to which extent pending changes doesn't halt edits anyway, because they do add some level of friction, right? Because like what will happen is that the person will edit, they won't see their edits reflected uh, from the page, as far as I understand, or they will see that they are pending. And I wonder if that would be some sort of mechanism to do that, right? But it's a good question. And like one thing to think about is like that could be a like something to be done, right? Like if there's a new feature to be tested, could you just kind of like have some sort of mechanism to randomly assigned either pending changes or other, like I could imagine having an experiment saying, okay, like from now on, there's a chance that you're randomly gonna assign this thing so that we see if it actually works better, right? That would be great.
Thank you, Manuel. I think we have time for one more quick question. So, Claudia, if you want to pass one of the questions from YouTube, please.
Sure. One more question from YouTube chat from Nicholas Vigneron. Would it be possible to replicate on other Wikipedias for comparison?
Yeah, so it would. Maybe I can also talk about the reason why we didn't, right? Which is like why it's hard. So there's two things, right? Like first, each Wikipedia has slightly different bureaucracy in terms of like how page protections work. So they can like everything, like all this matrix and plots that I showed you can differ depending on the Wikipedia you are. So that's one thing. The second thing is that article quality as measured by ORIS is not necessarily like translatable across Wikipedias, right? So like there's a notion of article quality and topics and so on being not exactly, it's not that necessarily that this you cannot run article quality on ours. It's just that what a high quality page means on that language might differ a bit. So I think that the point here is that like you have to think about each one of these constructs and how they relate to this other, that there's some sort of mapping that you need to do from each one of them. But the hardest one is really I think these categories are not exactly the same for some of the other languages. And the protection appeal and like this procedure is not exactly the same. And like this is something that Torsten looked very close by. So I might be butchering the response. If the Wikimedia folks have corrections here, I may be wrong there. But there is like it's not like it's as many things, right? When you go multilingual in Wikipedia, you find all these creases that like make it hard for you to generalize.
Okay, thank you very much, Manuel, for the great presentation. Super interesting. I have some questions, but I think at the end of the showcase, we can have a general discussion and probably ask the questions there.
Okay, thank you so much.
So let's now go for the second presentation today. As I already told you, this presentation it's entitled "Seeing Like an AI: How LLMs Apply and Misapply Wikipedia Neutrality Norms." This is a topic that we are super also interested in Foundation, and we have been analyzing and reading this specific this work led by Joshua. Joshua Askenazi is a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan School of Information. He's interested in human-computer interaction and computational social science. Specifically, he's interested in understanding the effects of existing AI systems beyond the individual level and building new multi-agent systems inspired by social science to better support collectives. So, Joshua, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for coming.
Okay, thank you so much for the introduction. I'll just share my screen here. All right, so I'm going to be talking about how LLMs apply and misapply Wikipedia neutrality norms. And this was work that I worked on with Ruha Guan and Laura, who's on the call, Eitan Adar for my department, and then my advisors, Jaren and Eric. Okay, so to start, we have a number of these generalist models which are trained on very broad corpora, and they can answer like seemingly anything that you throw at them. And then we have a number of these online communities with very specific norms and guidelines. So as we think about deploying these models in these very specific communities, a general question arises, which is how well can they follow community guidelines? So our specific focus here is how well can general purpose LLMs apply Wikipedia's neutral point of view? And we think that this is a good test for three reasons. So first, Wikipedia is one of the most visited websites, and NPOV is fundamental to Wikipedia. For example, Jimmy Wales called it the biggest and most important thing. But it has this really interesting tension, which is that it's very well articulated in theory. Like there's a lot of pages dedicated to it. It's cleanly enumerated, but it's super messy to apply in practice. So just as one data point here, somebody observed the Wikipedia entry for clean coal, and they found 39 facts and 142 different rewrites of these facts. And so really what we're testing is if high-level rules are enough to guide models to rule on specific cases like expert community members would. And a data point here is that 40% of edits are coordination between editors. So even for humans, there's a fair bit of interpretive complexity here. So we have two very practical goals today. The first is to provide a realistic assessment of how well LLMs apply NPOV, and this could inform the extent and the shape of AI integration. But the thing is that to some extent, there's nothing super special about the models that we have in our paper because new models get introduced all the time. And so we think the other contribution of our work is really providing an evaluation framework for testing how new computational systems might apply NPOV, whether that's new large language models or whatever is after that. So we had three research questions, which we split across two tasks that we thought would be feasible for LLMs to do. So the first task is detection. Doesn't edit violate NPOV? And then the second task is generation, because you can imagine another use case of LLMs is that after either a human or an AI flagged an edit as NPOV, then the LLM is going to try to rewrite it in some way. So the question here is, how should an NPOV violating edit be changed? And we looked at this two ways. So first we looked at, well, how do LLMs neutralize edits relative to Wikipedia editors? And we found that there were some interesting differences. And then we said, well, which of these neutralization styles do crowd workers prefer? So a crucial axis along these research questions is this thing about what's the gold standard. So for 1 and 2, it's Wikipedia editors are the gold standard. And for 3, we're using lay people judgment as the gold standard. Just as some context, I'm sure everybody here knows there's pillars to Wikipedia, and this is neutral point of view. So the data set that we use is called the Wikipedia Neutrality Corpus, and it contains pairs where there's a biased edit and then some neutral edit. And the biased edit was an edit flagged by an editor for violating NPOV, and the neutral edit was the rewrite of that edit. And these pairs were crawled between 2004 and 2019. Now, one limitation of this data set, and hence this is a limitation of our work, is that the WNC actually focuses on a subset of NPOV, which is biased language. But this subset is very useful for LLMs because it doesn't require access to external information. Okay, so now I'll talk about the detection task. And the setup here is we have pairs of these biased neutralized edits. And the question is this edit biased or neutral? And we also had LLMs provide an explanation. So we did about 5,400 trials, and it was a balanced data set, half biased, half neutral. So the implication there is that if you were to guess at random, you would have 50% accuracy. And we experimented with some different prompt conditions. So factor one was how we describe the rules of NPOV, essentially. So in the minimal condition, we gave basically no definition. And then in the NPOV one, we fed in the verbatim NPOV definition. And then we had another condition called NPOV scoped, where we provided text using language from the Prisant paper, which was focused on the specific kinds of violations in WNC. And we also varied whether we did this zero shot or few shot. And we used three different models. And the logic for these was that the first was the state of the art one at the time. The second was the most commonly used. And the third was from an open source developer. So our first headline result was that all the LLMs did fairly poorly. Like the best combination was 63% accuracy. And of course, when you get a result like this, people say, oh, well, maybe you didn't try some other prompt. So if you read the paper, we did like a bunch of other more advanced prompt techniques like chain of thought, bootstrap, few shot rationales, self-optimization. We actually found one technique boosted accuracy to 64%, but it wasn't statistically significantly different from the 63% in the main experiment. But in addition to just looking at accuracy, what we looked at was how models failed. So they're going to make errors, right? And the question we had was, are these errors likely to be false positives or false negatives? And what we found is that it really differed depending on the model. So we found that ChatGPT would overpredict things as biased, Mistral Medium did the opposite, and GPT-4 had a relatively balanced amount of errors. So then we tried to look into why models are getting some of these right and some of these wrong. And we triangulated across looking at which edits were classified with a high degree of accuracy a lot, and also looking at model explanations. And from this, the first thing we found is that models appear to rely on really simple heuristics, almost like a bag of word kind of approach, where they would just find really high subjectivity words. So this is an edit with a high probability of accuracy, and it's kind of easy because of these words that we bolded, and that's what the model explanations would refer to. But this also led to a lot of false positives with this interesting failure mode. So this is an edit with a low probability of accuracy. Basically, the relevant part is that it says the ad called Obama a hypocrite. So, like, if you were reading this, you would say, well, like, the edit's not calling Obama a hypocrite. That's what the ad is doing. And what the models did, though, is they saw this word hypocrite and they said, okay, well, this is like violating NPOV. But one of the interesting things about this failure mode is that it does indicate that they're at least able to zoom in on what might possibly be violating NPOV, but maybe they just make a bad or weird judgment call after doing so. And so that brings us to our other research question, which is how do LLMs neutralize edits relative to Wikipedia editors? So the setup here is that we have these same pairs of the biased neutralized edits. And what we're going to do is feed the biased edit to the LLM and then have the LLM neutralize that edit. And then we're going to compare the AI neutralization to the human neutralization. And we used GPT-4 and we did 800 generations for this. So we varied a few factors again. So the first was whether to neutralize this using zero shots. We basically just instructed the LLM to neutralize the edit. And then a second approach we did, inspired by constitutional AI, or CAI as it'll be abbreviated later, is where we first had the model make a critique of why that edit violated NPOV, and then we would feed that critique to the new model, and then it would revise it essentially. And we also experimented with constraining instructions because what we found is that initially these models were changing everything. And so we wanted to know if we could just do like a super simple intervention to tamp down on this. So the constraining instructions were essentially only change what's needed. So the first thing that we measured was simply the volume of changes. So not looking at content or anything. And the left-hand side is going to measure normalized edit distance. So 0 means basically very few changes, 1 means a lot of changes. And then the right-hand side is going to be counts of these distinct additions and removals. So the first thing that we found was that LLMs change a lot more than Wikipedia editors. So in both of these graphs, you have this dashed line, which is the average for Wikipedia editors. And we see that all the bars, so all the conditions, were definitely above that line. We also found that this constitutional AI approach resulted in a lot more changes than zero shot. And we also found that constraining instructions definitely helped. So red is constrained, blue is unconstrained, and we see that these relatively simple constraining instructions actually tamp down on changes a lot. We then looked at some of the dynamics of neutralization here, like how do humans versus AI do it? And what we found is that humans were much more likely to remove than add words, and AI was more likely to add than remove. And then we treated Wikipedia edits as the gold standard, and we tracked two metrics that we thought would be really important to monitor if this was actually deployed. So the first metric is precision, and it's how often the words that AI removed were also removed by human editors. And you want AI to avoid making unneeded changes, obviously. So that's the reason why we would care about this. And it's kind of measuring like how surgical is the AI. The other thing we looked at was recall, and it was how often AI removed the words that human editors also removed. And so we want AI to neutralize NPOV violating terms. And this is kind of measuring, does AI catch violations? And so what we found in all these conditions is that recall was much higher than precision. So the implication here is that LLMs are actually very good at removing the words that Wikipedia editors remove, but they will also make a lot of these other more extraneous changes. So at this point, we found that Wikipedia editors and LLMs neutralize stuff differently. And so we conducted this experiment and we wanted to see which do crowd workers prefer on a number of pertinent dimensions. So here's the setup. We recruited a number of crowd workers. They first completed a short NPOV training. And then for a series of trials, they saw these triplets where there was this biased edit, then there was an AI neutralization, then there was a human neutralization. We measured a couple of things, but just for this presentation, I'll talk about two. So we asked people, which of these rewrites improve neutrality more? We asked them which was written most fluently. And all the edits were from GPT-4, and we experimented with both zero shot and that constitutional AI approach. So here's an example trial just to see how this looked. So on the top, you have the original edit, and then we color-coded diffs of these different rewrites to make clear what the different changes were. One limitation of this is that obviously crowd workers are not Wikipedia editors. We thought they're more likely representative Wikipedia readers, and so our evaluation is probably going to say more about lay readers than expert editor judgments, who are the ones that are, making Wikipedia run. But what we found is that AI was chosen as more neutral and fluent than the human edits. So I guess just to bound how big you think of an effect size this is, if people were rating them exactly equally, right, it would be 50-50. So it's quite a bit higher than 50-50 for neutrality and for fluency as well. And we were really surprised by this. So if you read the paper, we did a bunch of robustness checks to verify this wasn't some weird artifact of our experiment. And in fact, we even replicated this experiment again with a small change, and we found that the results were still there. So then we started looking into these neutralizations more, these different rewrites. And the structure of this is that the top is going to be the Wikipedia editor rewrite, the second is going to be constitutional AI, and below that is zero shot. And I'm showing you diffs so you can see how each of these different editors change things. So our first finding from this more qualitative analysis is we basically recovered what the computational analysis showed, that LMs are what we call the NPOV plus, like relatively high recall, low precision. One thing that's interesting though is the changes that they make a lot of the times are not really related to NPOV, but they're like writing improvements, and it makes the language sound more formal. And so we think that this definitely influenced participant judgments, even though we told them not to. So we can't rule out that participants were, in some sense, influenced by LLMs making things sound a little bit more LLM-y, which could sort of confound judgments of neutrality. But then in other cases, we could definitely see how people would say LLMs applied NPOV better. So case 9 is one where, arguably this word gimmick should have been removed. And case 10 was a very interesting one. So it's about this like alternative medicine clinic, and there's this disagreement between these different editors of how definitively you should say it treats things. So the human editor says it treats many types of health conditions, and then constitutional AI says it only claims to treat various health conditions, and Zero Shot says it provides services for various health conditions. So I'll discuss 5 takeaways from this. The first is LLMs largely fail the detection. It might be something like applying subtle guidelines to real world cases is difficult for current LLMs, but this is actually also a very hard task. So at least in our data set, the NPOV edits were made by senior editors, and somebody did a somewhat similar experiment with a subset of edits where the bias was due to one word. And what they found is that crowd workers could only guess the biased word in an edit 37% of the time. So it's very likely that LLMs are substantially better at this than crowd workers, but maybe worse than actual Wikipedia editors. And low performance might be due to like overlearning a notion of neutrality from broad web corpora. And if that's the case, then you probably want to do some kind of fine tuning to change model parameters. And in the paper, we talk about a number of possible solutions here, like fine tuning various multi-agent system approaches and RAG. Another thing we found is that models have these different biases. So ChatGPT would overpredict things as biased, and Mistral did the opposite. So it may be that pre-trained LLMs internalize distinct priors about what constitutes neutrality. And one of the implications of this is that if you're using a closed source model, it's a bit tricky because it might get updated and then you don't know exactly how those priors would change. But there's also probably some way to use contrasting biases to help with NPOV detection. And for a separate project, we created this library called Plurals, which was all about simulating pluralistic deliberation with AI, where you could sort of control how agents go back and forth and information sharing structures. So it might be if you created some kind of multi-agent setup with guidelines from Wikipedia that would actually better mirror how editors deliberate, and hence that could improve accuracy. We found that LLMs diverged from community experts, which were Wikipedia editors, but were preferred by crowd workers. So it might be that instruction tuned models apply rules in ways that resonate with a very broad public, but could diverge from community experts. And it also highlights how complex alignment is in a case like this, because there's all these different stakeholders who probably have different preferences. So what exactly constitutes, ideal performance for one of these systems? We found LLMs are NPOV plus, meaning they actually are really good at changing the stuff that Wikipedia editors change, but they also change a bunch of other things. So if you do value recall over precision, they're very useful. But these extraneous changes are problematic because first, it could reduce editor agency. And there's also this question of like checking for hallucinations. So the more it writes, you would have to check that it's not making stuff up. So it definitely seems like human AI hybrid systems would be the way to go here. And I don't think Wikipedia would also want to like autonomously delegate NPOV to LLMs anyway. I think that there's several ways of better integrating things on Wikipedia that we didn't actually do, like integrating talk pages or editor history. I also think the crowd worker evaluation we did could be useful for running with different stakeholders. So you could imagine proposing like different kinds of systems for neutralization, and then you have different stakeholders like researchers and editors, etc., actually take these experiments. We also sketched some axes to consider for preserving editor agency, but also getting the benefits of LLMs. So the first axis, I talked a little bit about this, but there's few changes versus many changes. I mean, constraining instructions already help a lot, but some other ideas would be you can imagine generating multiple neutralizations and then only showing the one with the least changes. You could also imagine like a multi-agent system where, one agent generates some neutralization, another checks, did you change too many things? I think there's like a conceptual thing too about do you position what the LLM produces as a critique, meaning it's kind of an input to a human, or like a rewrite, meaning it is the actual output? There's also questions around how often would this be triggered. You can imagine that there's various triggering mechanisms, but it could be stochastic, like, only 20% of the time that we actually generate a neutralization. I think there's also a question around what would it take for people to trust the detection results? And this gets at what I called low trace versus high trace, like how much of the LLM reasoning do you want to surface? More broadly, you could even imagine a two by two where there's one axis, like how much control do editors have over whether the neutralization is triggered, and another axis is how much control do they have over the output of it. So I think one takeaway here is that even when articulating principles is easy, applying them to particular cases like community members do might still be hard. And here's a list with our main findings, and happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Joshua, thank you very much for this presentation and for all this work. As I mentioned in the presentation, we have been following your work and it's very useful. In this case, I would talk for myself for my work. I I will open the questions from YouTube and from the room, but I have one first question for myself that is about the data sets. Uh, because most of the examples that you have mentioned here are related to the words used, but the definition of NPOV it's wider, and I would like to understand your view on other things that are not related with the language, but with the representing. For example, there's this definition of that neutral point of view should represent all significant views fairly, proportionally, without bias, referring to a topic. So you can have perfect language, but about one topic, but you can show just one position on that topic. So this will be signal if you use templates about NPOV. This will be signal with the NPOV template. So if you're using these community labels, or if your dataset use these kind of labels, how you think the LLM can understand this other implementation of neutrality, and at the same time, if this dataset is public, how you ensure that there's no some leaks on the data, and when the LLM that you're using here, ChatGPT, or any of these models, they don't know the data set itself that you are using. So basically what you're seeing is not that the LLM is understanding, but is basically remembering the
Mhm.
labels.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I said, I think the data set is definitely a limitation, and it's only focused on, biased language, so it's hard to exactly generalize from this how it would apply to other things. I mean, my sense is that biased language should be easier than what you were talking about. So I feel like if it does poorly on this, I don't think it would do better on that. The contamination is something we thought about too. So what's interesting about that is like they did very poorly on detection despite the risk of it being contaminated. So, yeah, I think it would suggest that they're not very good at this detection task because they did poorly, and that's actually in the presence of, as you mentioned, some kind of, possible data leakage.
Yeah, totally. When I was reading your paper, I was thinking similar. Like even with this kind of contamination or this kind of data leaks, the LLMs doing this job, I think it opened a lot of eyes and questions about how to use LLM. So it has been super useful. And thank you for the answer. We have a question from the room. I think Isaac, if you want to ask your question.
Yep. Thanks, Josh, for the presentation. I was thinking about, well, so first, I love that this work is looking at both classification and generation in the same space and thinking about kind of the strengths and weaknesses and those things. I've been thinking about like a third area that kind of fits into that, categorization, I guess. I mean, I think you kind of even touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but something in between where it's like the LM's not, it's not just identifying that there's an issue. It's not saying exactly what the fix is, but kind of giving guidance to support maybe an editor to like saying like, hey, I think there's an issue here. This is what I think might be where the issue is, but like you kind of figure out how to fix it. Do you have any sense of how you think like yeah, if you were essentially like, okay, let's build the, test where we see how well it does at this, what sort of results we might see and what sort of things to consider for that sort of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think the recall precision thing speaks to this a little bit. I mean, my sense is that it's going to have a lot of false positives in what its surfaces, which could be kind of annoying. But I do think that it could definitely work for, yeah, just surfacing like here's what the problem could be. And as I alluded to, I actually think that's a very good use because it makes it so they're not really making a final determination. Because as we found, they are actually kind of good at flagging this might be, a problem, but they're kind of bad at making judgment calls. So yeah, I think that would be really interesting. I guess if I had to predict it, I would say that they are going to be good at like catching a lot of stuff, but they're going to kind of overdo it. I guess how you evaluate that is probably a really interesting question, like with humans, I mean, there's other experiments that look at similar things, and you might look at the human alone and the human with the AI, and you could measure different things like how much do they catch, and I've seen these things measure like task satisfaction too. So yeah, I think that could be really interesting if you were using it as an input to a human as opposed to an output.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that makes sense about the kind of doing the experiment of controlling, yeah, comparing the human plus AI versus human, and that probably is the most direct way to handle it. I'll pass Diego to whoever's next.
Yeah, we have few questions also from the YouTube audience. So Claudia, if you can
Sure.
pass.
Think we've got two great questions coming from the YouTube chat that I'm going to combine together. We've got one question about LLMs or crowd workers defaulting to American English, where a source text in English Wikipedia often uses many different styles, variants of English, and another great question about LLMs having more formal and fluent language that confounds the issue of neutrality, which, if I were to combine them, will ask, to what extent do you see like LLMs producing language that plays to your human judges' expectations of what neutrality aesthetically should be like versus a truly neutral output?
That's a great question. That's actually sort of the explanation we pointed to in the paper, that it was something like that. It just creates language that sounds very proper. And so if people, say, yeah, I guess that's what neutrality is. I think the American English thing is a great thing to flag as well, because these were US crowd workers. So I definitely think that could also be playing a role.
Thank you very much, Joshua. So we have a bit more time to have an open discussion here. So I invite the room and also people attending through the streaming YouTube to ask questions or to bring discussions for both presenters. Um, I have one general question that is related with these two presentations, and any of you, Joshua, Manuel, or Laura, if you're around, if you can give your thoughts about what you think it's the future of patrolling and content integrity in Wikipedia looking like with all the advancement of LLM. So it would be that we need more like community norms and protect page earlier and maybe close a bit the contributions because LLMs will bring a lot of content that would be difficult to patrol, or you think that probably LLMs will offer a tool to patrol better. So I would like to know how you envision the future and how you see that Wikipedia is changing or will change with the rise of generative AI in general. So Manuel or Joshua, whoever wants to start.
Yeah, maybe I can like I think that there's two things, right? So first, like there's something that I find very non-Gen AI related, which is basically that I think that one thing that would be very helpful in those spaces is to have a way of deriving causal knowledge better. So I think it's very hard. It's very hard to know things, right? Because things are super confounded by everything. So like one thing that would be very helpful in terms of like I probably the Wikimedia Foundation is like, can you actually make this in a way that's like a bit like more uh like easier to measure if you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing, right? Because right now it's like you're reaching the limits of what community driven can get you, right? Like it's unclear where it goes. It's pretty good, but like to make improvements, I think it's often very hard to do without experiments, right? Like at the level that Wikipedia is right now. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I found very interesting the point that Joshua made about recall and about critique versus output, right? And I really tend to steer towards the direction of critique, but like maybe like critique is not the best word, because critique suggests that you're critiquing something, right? And like the big, like that there exists something to be critiqued, right? Like that there is this edit and you're gonna critique the edit. But like part of the beauty of the whole thing is that you can come up with the edit, right? You can come up with the potential patrol, right? So it's almost like a suggestion, right? So I like a suggestion to be vetted. And I think that like this framework of like suggestions would be something very helpful, right? Because like if you think about what Gen AI is most helpful for, are things where like checking if something is correct, it's much more work than doing the thing yourself, right? So like creating an image is like very hard, but like creating an image with Midjourney is not very hard, right? So and in this case, it could be that there's a lot of patrolling tasks where finding the proof is much simpler than doing that, right? And I think that that could be a useful framework, especially because it's not a very revolutionary way of using things, right? Because I think that the community is very hesitant to delegate things to this external force that it's like very obscure in many ways. So that would be a way of like ensuring that there is some value to be added immediately. So that's how I've been thinking about it. And yeah, I don't know.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Joshua, if you want to add something.
Yeah, sure. I definitely think I mean, how I think about the critique rewrite, in a different paper, I call it like input focused versus output focused. I think that's probably a good way to think about it. And what's also good about that is there's actually a lot of work about how you create systems where the AI is doing good input. So I feel like there's a lot of guidance to go on. Um, I mean, yeah, I think another implication of generative AI could definitely be like a fracturing of certain of these community norms, possibly, because like if people are it seemed like at least with that alternative medicine clinic thing, one thing my co-authors thought about is that it might be that people in this, Wikipedia community, they have like some specific standard of neutrality. And so I guess there could be something interesting about when generative AI sort of flattens that and what the implications of that would be. I mean, it would seem like it would be a regression to the mean, sort of like Manuel's finding with the low quality and high quality. It might make some things better and make others worse, but I think that's probably one implication. Whether or not that's sort of a risk or a benefit would certainly be something to consider.
I want to take the acknowledge the comment from Manuel about the confounding factors and how the foundation can help with measuring this. I think this is a very difficult problem per se. Because first of all, the openness of Wikipedia and how Wikipedia is being used for example, training these LLMs for sure affects also how we can then evaluate, and this discussion about data leaks will be always there. And I hope that Wikipedia stay open forever, and that would also imply that the LLMs will be learning from there. And while Wikipedia it's keeping their openness, we know that many of the commercial LLMs have become more and more obscure in terms of how they are trained and which data and when the data was trained was inputted. So I think we have a problem there. And the same thing for the page protection. There's it's difficult to understand when something is vandalized. Wikipedia is always related to the real world, and if this vandalization is basically intrinsic from Wikipedia or comes from external factors, it will be something that will be always difficult to
No.
know from the beginning. Like you can have some controversies that starts from Wikipedia and goes out, but you will have a lot of things that are starting from out and coming to Wikipedia.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are living interesting times in terms of content quality, and I think the kind of research that you both are doing and all your co-authors, and thank you for your co-authors also, it's very relevant for at least open these discussions. We don't see these kind of discussions out there that much nowadays, and research like yours gives answer, but also opened other very interesting questions that we'll keep discussing for sure in this and other spaces. In fact, if you are interested and the audience is interested in keep following this discussion, we invite you to subscribe to the Wiki Research L mailing list, and you can continue the conversation there. I would like to thank our speaker, Manuel and Joshua, for presenting today. I also want to thank the team that made this research showcase possible. Research showcase possible. Eli and Kinner that couldn't be here today, but thank you very much. This would not be possible without you. Claudia for taking the questions from YouTube. Isaac also that helps a lot in the coordination today, so thank you very much. Emerald that is on the commands for the streaming, and everyone that attended and watched and asked questions. Next month, we will focus on a new topic that is entitled Examining the Impact of LLMs on Knowledge Production Communities. So we will continue this discussion about LLMs. We know that this is a hot topic nowadays in research, in industry, everywhere. So we will continue the discussion. And we invite you to come. Next showcase would be in July. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending, and see you next month. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.